Like an Italian food, doesn't it? Mortadella. But it's actually a little cup-like creature, and it has cilia around the edges of the cup, and it has this little filament. And it will anchor itself to the bottom of the pond or a stick or something and crouch down. And when a piece of food swims by, it springs out on its filament, sweeps the food into the cup. And there are actual things. I've actually scooped some up in my pond water and seen them occasionally. So it's just typical stuff that you may find in pond water. So those are your heterotrophic protista. And then we're going to talk about nematodes. And these are other things some of you may have seen in pond water. Some that kind of looks like this, which actually is phylum Rotifera, which is not in kingdom Protista at all. It's a whole different kingdom. But some of you might see it in your pond water. All right. Oh, here's my pile over here, I guess. All right. Now, in your list, we have not only kingdom Protista, but we also have kingdom Animalia. And in kingdom Animalia, there are different types of worms, also arthropods and insects, but a lot of worms. And I happen to have posters of worms, so that's what we're going to do. All right, clear off some space here. Hang in there. Just want to get you a little familiar with some of these worms. Get some terminology. We're not nearly as fascinated as my Thursday group. But then again, it's Monday. Okay. Kingdom Animalia, endoparasites, phylum Platyhelminthes, flatworms. There's different kinds of flatworms. The first kind are flukes. That's class Trematoda. Here's an example of Plenorchus sinensis, the Chinese liver fluke. This one is magnified 15 times. I have slides upstairs with Plenorchus sinensis on the slide, and it's about that big, so it easily fits under the cover slip. As opposed to this one, which is a sheep liver fluke, but humans can get it also. It's called Fasciola hepatica. It's not on your list there, but it's another type of a fluke. And in fact, the jar I showed you in lab, there's actually a jar with some dead ones in it of these. They're about that big. So this guy is actually magnified 3 times. So it's about that big. And they truly look flat. They look like somebody ran over them with the rolling pin. This one is Schistosoma japonicum, which is on your list. And this one is the Japanese liver fluke. This one is actually Schistosoma mannsoni, a blood fluke, but it's similar. It's Schistosoma. Now this one doesn't really look flat like these, but structurally and functionally, I guess some taxonomists decided it was the same. So this one is a fluke also. These are actually kind of male and female parts together. So this is ovaries and testes in this worm. Here it's a little less obvious which parts are which. And in this one, they actually have male and female worms. So in your textbook, when you look at the Schistosoma japonicum life cycle, you'll see a little drawing of the male and female kind of wrapped together, mating or copulating or whatever you call it. Okay, so this is a fish parasite of another type. It's a different class I didn't even put on your list, but it's another type of a fluke also. Then these are a whole other class that I didn't put on your list, but these are just non-pathogenic flatworms that might be, go swimming in the Peace River, they'll be in there, or they might be in a pond or something. They're not harmful. And planaria is a very common one that most biology classes look at in high school. Has anybody looked at planaria before? No? Nobody remembers looking at planaria worms in high school? Oh, so sorry. They're about that big. They're tiny little worms. They don't hurt you.
I think that sheep liver fluke is on our list.
It is Fasciola hepatica? Oh, good for me. Must have thrown that on there. Huh. Here is another one of those pond posters, just to show you that planaria flatworm, the little harmless guy. He's commonly found in pond water, and so is the leech, which is phylum Annelida. It's a whole other phylum, but it's a segmented worm like earthworms. So there you go, a leech commonly found in pond water. Oh, I didn't tell you the story about my professor, did I? That was my Thursday class. Man, I was on a roll Thursday. Must have drank too much energy shot or something. Anyway, there's a jar upstairs in lab in the back of the room on the back counter. And not only do I have flukes in a jar, but I have leeches in another jar, in case you want to have an up-close look at leeches. And leeches come in all sizes. The ones I have in the jar are about that big. But my professor, so when I was an undergraduate, I worked on a research grant doing field work with actual real critters out in Rensselaerville, New York, upstate New York. Beautiful area, but you know, it was farmland, and a lot of the farms were abandoned by now because most people have gone to the city and started doing other kinds of work, and there's not so much farming going on, and of course this was back in the 70s. So anyway, my professor tells all of us to get in the van one day. We're going to go out and collect samples from ponds. Well, we needed to sample predaceous diving beetle larvae, because that's what we were doing our research on, which is actually they eat tadpoles. And little insect larvae are smart little buggers. They learn which tadpoles are toxic and which tadpoles are yummy. And all they have to do is flash one of these toxic tadpoles, and they're like, oh no, oh no. Give them a good one, and they're like, yeah, maybe you won't. Anyway, they're so smart that after a while, all they have to do is see you coming over there with a pair of tweezers, and they know it's feeding time. And they start banging their mandibles against the side of the container. You know, you would never think, but animals are really smart. So anyways, we get to this farm, an abandoned farm, and many farmers would like dig a pond to collect rainwater so the cows could drink out of it and whatnot. So it's an abandoned farm, so there's essentially this stagnant pond out there. And so he's like, come on, let's go in there and get some of those diving beetle larvae. And we're like, you go first. He's like, I have a bunch of wussies. So he goes in first. And he's collecting samples and putting them in his bag. And then he starts coming out of the pond, and he's walking really fast out of the pond. And this is a big fat guy, you know, with a pipe and a hat. And, you know, over here, and we're like, holy shit, what's going on? And he comes out of the pond, and his legs were covered with leeches. Little tiny leeches about that big. He had as many leeches as hair. So he's like, get in the van! You, in the front seat with me! I'm like, I ain't getting in the front seat. I don't want to be anywhere near you at this point. And everybody like, dead silence. We don't say a word. We all like get in the van. I'm like sitting way over here. And he's driving home. And so when we got home, essentially what was our home for the summer, he sat on the edge of the bathtub and let the hot water run over his legs to get those leeches to come off. It makes my skin crawl just to think about it. But anyway, those are leeches for you. So that's a whole other phylum. And not even flatworms, just a whole other kind of worm. So back to the flatworms. So you have your flukes and you have your tapeworms. So I wanted to tell you a little tapeworm story. So this is a tapeworm, and it's Taenia. So it's like the beef tapeworm or something. So every different type of tapeworm, actually, they can be all different sizes and length and even widths, and they all have a different looking head. The head is called the scolex. So there's a little bit of terminology you gotta know. The head of the tapeworm is called the scolex. So, the scolex might have suckers on it. Those are little suction discs. They're not suckers for eating, they're suckers for suctioning, for attaching to the inside of your digestive wall. Yummy. So those are suckers, and many tapeworms also have hooks. And the hooks are also for helping them attach to your gut. So, let's say you eat a piece of measly beef. You know that term, measly? You wastfully whack it. And then, what's the Yosemite Sam? He would use that term sometimes, measly. You know when your mom took you to the beach as a kid and she'd like make bologna sandwiches, and then you'd be eating bologna sandwiches at the beach and it'd get sand in the bologna and you'd be like crunching on your bologna, it was gross. Well, that's what measly beef is like. It's meat with like a grainy texture because of all the tapeworm cysts in it. Or you might have measly pork because there are pork tapeworms also. Also, there's trichinosis, which is a whole other, is a roundworm pork disease, and that can also make cysts in the pork muscle. So measly beef menu was full of these parasite cysts. Anyways, so if you eat some measly beef and you haven't cooked it thoroughly enough to kill the worm inside the cyst, what's inside the cyst in the meat is essentially the scolex of the worm. And it comes out of its little cyst and attaches in your gut wall, up here somewhere higher up in your digestive tract. And then it starts growing from the head, and it grows these little segments. And each little segment is called a proglottid. I'm like, really? They have to come up with these goofy words. You know, can't just call it a thing. What? But it's got a name. It's a proglottid. The proglottids grow out from the head of the worm, and as new ones grow out, the older ones start moving down the pipe here, and they grow and become increasingly mature, and the tapeworm is actually self-fertilizing. That sounds like fun. And so, by the time these young immature proglottids are out closer to the exit, you know what I mean? They're full of ripe, mature eggs. So here's the scolex, right here. Here's the immature proglottids. And then here's a mature proglottid somewhere down here. And all that dark stuff is ripe eggs. So when the segment or the proglottid is passed in the feces, sometimes an entire chunk will be passed in the feces. It's full of ripe eggs. And so let's say the cow has tapeworms, and he passes some proglottids in his feces. It's in the grass now. Another cow comes along grazing, he swallows it, and the whole life cycle continues. Well, the cow that's passing tapeworm proglottids in his feces, if he's got tapeworm disease badly enough, some of those proglottids actually burrow through the digestive wall and into the muscle tissue where they form the cysts. So if you're a human being and you put yourself in the life cycle, because after all that's what you raise the cow for, to eat it, and you eat the beef that's full of the tapeworm cysts that came from the proglottids, you now are going to ingest the tapeworm scolex, and it's going to start growing in your digestive tract, and you're going to start passing proglottids in your feces, and if you have advanced tapeworm disease, it's going to burrow through your digestive wall and insist in your muscle tissue. Now, there are antibiotics and stuff for that, but you know how hard that is to treat once you got all the cysts in your muscle? Yeah.
But if you cook the beef thoroughly,
Yep.
where it's like a piece of leather, you're not going to get that.
Right. You can eat measly beef as long as it's cooked well enough to kill those tapeworms in the cyst.